Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the brutal truth about medieval secret societies and their shadowy black mass rituals, those clandestine gatherings where knights and outcasts alike whispered oaths that could shatter souls or empires, all under the veil of fog-shrouded nights that hid horrors more twisted than any modern conspiracy theory. Did you know that historians estimate over 80% of these societies' initiates faced accusations of heresy, often fabricated by greedy kings like Philip IV of France, who tortured confessions out of the Knights Templar to seize their vast treasures, leaving behind a legacy of debated myths that still chill scholars today? What if the very cross you revered was the one they allegedly spat upon during initiation? A shocking desecration meant to test loyalty, or perhaps mock the Church's iron grip on power. And imagine the absurdity of rituals involving kissing a severed head idol called Baphomet, a figure some argue was a pagan fertility god twisted into satanic form by inquisitorial fever. Dreams, could such bizarre customs have been real paths to enlightenment, or just elaborate hoaxes to justify mass arrests? These questions linger like the metallic tang of blood in the air, pulling you deeper into a world where secrecy wasn't just a choice, but a survival tactic, one that often ended in flames or forgotten dungeons. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how far this sleepy little time machine reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the chill of fog seeping through your thin cloak as you navigate the narrow, cobblestoned alleys of a medieval city, perhaps Paris in the late 13th century, where the damp mist clings to your skin like an unwelcome lover's grasp, carrying the faint, acrid scent of wood smoke from distant hearths and the underlying rot of overflowing gutters that slosh underfoot with every cautious step you take. Your heart quickens, not just from the cold that bites at your exposed neck, but from the prickling sensation along your arms, as if invisible brands are already marking you with the symbols of doubt and isolation that come with forbidden knowledge. And there, emerging from the swirling vapors like a spectre born of nightmares, a hooded figure approaches, their breath warm against your ear in stark contrast to the icy air, murmuring an oath that promises untold power, riches from distant crusades, protection from the Church's prying eyes, but stings your tongue with a metallic taste of impending betrayal, as if you're swallowing rusted iron filings mixed with the bitter regret of those who came before. Historians still debate whether these whispered invitations were genuine calls to enlightenment or clever traps set by rivals, with some arguing the Knights Templar used such rites to weed out the weak, forcing initiates to spit on the cross as a test of unwavering loyalty, a shocking act that mocked the very faith they swore to defend during the Crusades, while others insist it was all propaganda concocted by King Philip IV to justify his 1307 mass arrests and asset seizures, a move as ruthless as a corporate takeover in today's boardrooms, where the powerful devour the influential to line their own pockets. You hesitate, your fingers trembling as they brush against the rough wool of your garment, soaked through and heavy like the weight of secrets you're about to shoulder, and the figure's voice drops lower, weaving tales of ancient orders like the Templars or the Assassins, whose initiations allegedly involved blindfolds and symbolic deaths. Rebirths marked by absurd tidbits such as drinking from skulls, purportedly carved from enemies' bones, though academics quibble if these were real practices or embellished horrors from trial transcripts extracted under torture. Methods that included strappado, where arms were wrenched behind the back until shoulders popped like overripe fruit. The fog thickens around you, muting the distant clamour of market vendors closing up for the night, their lanterns flickering like dying stars, and you can't shake the ironic twist that these societies, born from the chaos of holy wars, offered brotherhood in a world of feudal backstabbing, yet demanded oaths that isolated you more profoundly than a solitary confinement cell in a maximum security prison, where the walls echo your own doubts back at you endlessly. As the hooded stranger presses a small, cold medallion into your palm engraved with enigmatic symbols that some say represented Baphomet, a goat-headed deity blending pagan and Christian elements, debated as either a hermetic wisdom figure or a devilish invention by the Inquisition, your skin crawls with the sensory struggle of anticipation mixed with fear, the metal warming unnaturally against your flesh, as if infused with the heat of forbidden fires. and you wonder if this is the start of ascension or the first step toward a pyre, where flames would lick at your feet like hungry tongues devouring the unfaithful. Zoom out for a moment and picture the vast tapestry of medieval Europe stretching before you, a patchwork of cathedrals piercing the sky like accusatory fingers, while beneath them, in cellars and forests, these societies thrived on the fringes, their members' knights returning from Jerusalem with eyes haunted by Saracen blades, seeking solace in rituals that promised control over chaos, yet often delivered only paranoia and persecution, a sad irony that echoes through history like the tolling of a distant bell signalling execution dawn. You nod, almost involuntarily. The fog swirling faster now as if conspiring with the night, and the figure draws you closer, their cloak brushing yours with a whisper of fabric that sounds like rustling leaves in a graveyard, hinting at the physical event to come, a clandestine meeting where you'll be blindfolded and led through twisting passages, your senses assaulted by the drip of water on stone and the faint, earthy smell of incense masking something fouler, perhaps the decay of old parchments holding encrypted doctrines. But beneath the calm facade of this invitation lies a shocking undercurrent of empathy for those who joined before you impoverished nobles or disillusioned clerics, drawn in by whispers of hidden treasures from the Holy Land, only to find themselves entangled in webs of accusation, where sodomy and idolatry charges flew like arrows in battle, fabricated or not, leading to confessions wrung from broken bodies on the rack. Their screams a testament to the human cost of secrecy. It's absurd, really, how these rites incorporated elements like kissing the initiator on the mouth or navel, rituals some historians tie to ancient mystery cults like those of Mithras, where symbolic acts represented rebirth, yet in the Templars' case, twisted into evidence of depravity by a king drowning in debt, much like a desperate CEO cooking the books to avoid bankruptcy. Your breath comes in shallow puffs, visible in the chill air, mingling with the strangers, and you feel the isolation creeping in already, a psychological chill that seeps deeper than the fog, making you question every shadow that dances along the alley walls, as if they're harbingers of the betrayals to follow friends turning informers, oaths broken under duress, societies crumbling like sandcastles against the tide of royal greed. The medallion in your hand grows heavier, its edges digging into your skin like tiny accusations, and as the figure begins to lead you away, the mist parts just enough to reveal a faint torchlight in the distance, flickering uncertainly, promising warmth, but delivering only the illusion of safety in a world where trust is as fragile as parchment in flame. You step forward, the cobblestones uneven under your boots, each one a reminder of the uneven path ahead, where power beckons but betrayal lurks, leaving you with a gnawing doubt that twists in your gut like a knife slowly turning, setting the stage for the veiled gatherings that await under moonless skies, where the true horrors of commitment begin to unfold in whispers that echo long after the night has swallowed them whole. You push through the scratching brambles that snag at your cloak like insistent fingers from the grave, each thorn drawing tiny beads of blood that well up warm and sticky on your skin, mixing with the chill dampness of the night air that seeps into your bones as if the forest itself is conspiring to slow your steps toward the flickering torchlight ahead, a distant glow that pulses like a heartbeat shrouded in mystery, pulling you forward despite the growing ache in your legs from trudging over uneven ground slick with fallen leaves and mud that squelches underfoot, sucking at your boots with a reluctant grip that mirrors the hesitation gnawing at your mind. The canopy above is a thick blanket of starless black, branches intertwining like skeletal arms locked in eternal embrace, blocking out any hint of moonlight and amplifying the rustle of unseen creatures scurrying through the underbrush, their tiny claws scraping against bark in rhythms that echo the enigmatic chants now reaching your ears, low and rhythmic, words twisted backward in incantations that sound like forgotten regrets whispered in reverse, each syllable laced with the damp rot of secrecy that clings to your lungs like mold in an abandoned crypt, making every breath a laboured effort as the scent of wet earth and decaying foliage fills your nostrils, heavy and oppressive, reminding you of how these masked assemblies were often held in remote groves to evade the prying eyes of the Inquisition, gatherings where participants donned hoods woven from coarse wool dyed black with oak galls, fabrics that itched against the skin like a constant reminder of the discomfort inherent in forbidden knowledge. Historians still argue whether these rituals were genuine devilish pacts invoking Lucifer through inverted prayers, Latin phrases recited backward to mock the Mass, a shocking desecration that could damn the soul, or mere political ploys orchestrated by disgruntled nobles to plot against tyrannical rulers like the popes who branded them heretics. Debates fueled by surviving trial records from the 14th century, where accused witches confessed under duress to attending sabbats, where they allegedly flew on broomsticks smeared with hallucinogenic ointments made from henbane and nightshade. Absurd tidbits that make you wonder if the real horror was the delirium induced by such potions, or the iron clamps of torture devices that twisted limbs until truth bled out in screams. Your heart races with the absurd irony of these backward prayers, worse than a bad autocorrect fail in a heated text argument, where words meant to heal end up wounding deeper, and as you draw closer, the torchlight resolves into a circle of flames held aloft by shadowy figures, their masks carved from wood or fashioned from animal hides, deerskins stretched taut over frames, eyes hollowed out to stare blankly like voids that swallow light, a sad element in how these disguises stripped away individuality, reducing knights and peasants alike to anonymous vessels for shared ecstasy and torment, empathy welling up for those who sought solace here after the traumas of plague-ridden villages or failed harvests that left families starving, only to find themselves entangled in rites that promised empowerment but delivered paranoia. The air grows thicker with the acrid smoke from the torches, pitch-soaked rags wrapped around sticks that sputter and pop, sending sparks dancing upward like fleeting souls escaping purgatory. And you feel the metallic tang of fear on your tongue again, that recurring motif mutating from the whisper's warmth in the alley to this sharper bite, as if tasting the iron of blood from your thorn-pricked fingers. A sensory struggle that heightens every sensation, the prickle of sweat beading on your brow despite the cold, the rough texture of bark as you steady yourself against a tree trunk etched with ancient runes. Symbols some scholars debate were Celtic holdovers or deliberate forgeries to lend authenticity to the ceremonies. Zoom out for a breath and imagine the vast woodlands of medieval France unfurling around you like a living shroud. Oaks and beeches standing sentinel over centuries of whispered rebellions, where secret societies like the Cathars once preached dualism, good and evil locked in cosmic battle, before being hunted to near extinction by crusaders who razed entire towns in the Albigensian Crusade. A factual moment where thousands perished in flames at Béziers in 1209, the papal legate's infamous command to kill them all, God will know his own, echoing through history with a sarcasm that bites harder than any thorn, much like modern witch hunts on social media, where accusations fly without evidence, ruining lives in digital bonfires. You step into the clearing at last, the physical event unfolding as masked figures turn toward you in unison, their chants faltering for a split second before resuming with renewed fervour, a wave of sound that washes over you like icy water, chilling your spine as one extends a gloved hand leather stiff from tannin and age, smelling faintly of animal fat to guide you into the circle, where the ground is trampled flat from countless feet, strewn with pine needles that prick through your thin soles, adding to the ache building in your arches. The empathy surges again for these participants, many of them women branded as witches for herbal knowledge passed down generations. Their gatherings a desperate bid for community in a world where the church monopolized salvation, yet twisted by inquisitors into tales of orgiastic sabbats involving black cats and flying ointments, an absurd historical tidbit where toads were supposedly milked for venom to induce visions, a practice debated as either genuine folk medicine or exaggerated folklore to justify burnings at the stake, where flames consumed flesh in spectacles meant to terrify the populace into obedience. Your pulse quickens as you're positioned near the central fire, its heat warring with the night's cold, warming your face while your back remains exposed to the encroaching chill. A sensory dichotomy that mirrors the internal conflict, the allure of belonging versus the dread of exposure, and you catch glimpses beneath the masks, eyes wide with a mix of fervour and fear, lips moving in synchronized blasphemy, reciting psalms backward to invoke protection from unseen forces, a shocking element in how these acts inverted the sacred, turning bread and wine into symbols of defiance rather than communion, sad in the way it isolated practitioners from their communities, branding them outcasts in life and heretics in death. The irony hits with a clever commentary on how these assemblies, meant to empower the marginalized, often ended in betrayal, much like joining a secretive online forum only to have your data leaked in a hack, leaving you exposed and vulnerable. As the chants build, rising in pitch to a hypnotic crescendo, you feel the damp rot deepening in your chest, each inhale laced with the musty odor of unwashed bodies pressed close. Wool cloaks heavy with absorbed moisture that clings like a second skin, mutating the motif of wet wool from mere discomfort in the alley to this suffocating embrace. And a figure steps forward, the one who whispered to you earlier, their hood casting deeper shadows, handing you a wooden cup filled with a bitter brew, herbs floating on the surface like drowned secrets, the liquid scalding your lips as you sip tentatively, tasting earth and something sharper, perhaps mandrake root for its numbing properties, debated by academics as a tool for trance states or a poison that blurred the line between vision and madness. Zoom out once more and see the grove as a microcosm of medieval Europe's underbelly, where forests served as neutral ground for the oppressed lepers, outlaws, and dissenters gathering under canopies that hid them from feudal lords' spies, yet couldn't shield them from the long arm of the church, which condemned such meetings as diabolical, leading to witch trials that peaked in the 15th century with manuals like the Malleus Maleficarum, guiding inquisitors to extract confessions through water ordeals or needle pricks searching for the devil's mark. A factual horror where innocence was drowned or pierced away. The brew takes hold subtly, a warmth spreading through your veins that dulls the thorn scratches but heightens the surreal quality of the scene. Masks blurring into grotesque caricatures under the erratic torchlight. Flames leaping higher now as if feeding on the collective energy, and you sense the psychological chill deepening, a gnawing isolation despite the crowd, as if each participant is adrift in their own sea of doubt, empathy flooding for the young initiates among them, perhaps apprentices fleeing guild oppression, who joined seeking power only to find rituals that demanded submission. Sarcastic in how the promise of flight on besoms turned out to be metaphorical escapes from reality, worse than booking a budget airline ticket that strands you mid-journey. The chants shift, incorporating calls to ancient deities twisted into Christian inversions, a sad twist where prayers for fertility or protection became evidence of pacts with Satan, and as the circle tightens, hands linking in a chain that pulls you inexorably into the rhythm, your fingers interlacing with strangers calloused from labour, slick with nervous sweat, the metallic tang returns, sharper now, like biting down on a coin to test its authenticity, mutating into a symbol of the false promises ahead. A sudden gust scatters embers across the ground, sparking tiny fires that illuminate forgotten relics half buried in the dirt, bone fragments or carved talismans. Debated as remnants of pagan sacrifices or planted evidence by accusers, and you feel the first pangs of unease twist into something deeper, a premonition of the forbidden scrolls awaiting in damp cellars, where words on parchment will unravel truths that cling like thorns to your soul, leaving you scarred and questioning in the starless night. Your trembling hands unfurl the brittle scrolls in the echoing gloom of the damp cellar, the parchment crackling like dry leaves underfoot in an autumn forest, as fragments flake off onto your fingertips, staining them with the faded ink of centuries-old secrets that pulse with a forbidden life of their own. And you can't help but wonder if these ancient words were etched in blood mixed with gall. A shocking custom, some historians debate, was used by medieval scribes to bind oaths eternally, preventing the text from fading like the fleeting loyalties of those who penned them, your breath catching in your throat as the musty scent of decay assaults your nostrils, a heavy, earthen rot that clings to the back of your tongue like mould on forgotten bread, filling your lungs with the weight of forgotten graves and mildewed stone that seeps moisture into your clothes, mutating the recurring motif of wet wool from the grove's damp embrace to this clammy chill that soaks through your tunic, making it stick to your skin like a second layer of regret, heavy and inescapable as the isolation that begins to gnaw at your core, deeper than the hunger twisting in your gut from the bitter brew still lingering on your lips. The cellar's air is thick and stagnant, lit only by the sputtering torch you've wedged into a rusted iron bracket on the wall, its flame casting erratic shadows that dance across the uneven stone like restless spirits fleeing the light, the heat from the fire warring faintly against the pervasive cold that bites at your exposed neck and fingers, each knuckle aching as you trace the illuminated symbols, curlicues and runes that some argue were borrowed from Arabic alchemy texts brought back by crusaders, debated as tools for transmuting lead into gold or souls into damnation. A factual thread from the 12th century when figures like Albertus Magnus experimented with hermetic arts in hidden laboratories, blending philosophy with the occult in ways that blurred the line between science and sorcery. Shocking in how these pursuits led to accusations of necromancy, where scholars were burned for daring to question divine order, their screams echoing in trial records that survive as sad testaments to intellectual curiosity crushed under the church's boot. You lean closer, the parchment's texture rough and uneven under your palms, like the bark of those clawing oaks from the grove now mutating into this fragile veil between past and present. And as your eyes adjust to the dim glow, the words resolve into descriptions of black mass rituals, inverted Eucharists where bread was trampled and wine spat upon. Customs historians still argue were exaggerated by inquisitors to fuel witch panics, or genuine inversions practiced by heretical sects like the Luciferians, who allegedly worshipped Satan as a liberator from tyrannical gods. An absurd tidbit in how they incorporated cat skulls as chalices, boiled with herbs to induce visions that blurred reality with hallucination, much like chugging an energy drink laced with expired cough syrup in a desperate all-nighter, only to wake up questioning what was dream and what was delirium. The sensory struggle intensifies as droplets of condensation plop from the ceiling onto the scroll, blurring the ink in spots and forcing you to wipe them away with your sleeve. The moisture cold and slimy against your skin, carrying the faint metallic tang that recurs now as a taste on your lips from licking them nervously, mutating from the bruised sharpness to this rusty flavour of oxidized iron seeping from the walls. Perhaps from chains once used to bind prisoners here during the Templar purges, a physical event unfolding as your fingers snag on a hidden seal, a wax imprint embedded in the parchment, pricking your thumb and drawing a bead of blood that mixes with the ancient script, staining it anew as if awakening the text with your own essence. The pain sharp but fleeting, like a needle's prick in a doctor's office gone wrong. Ironic in how this accidental offering mirrors the blood oaths described within, where initiates sliced palms to mingle vitae in pacts that bound them eternally. Sad in the empathy you feel for those who did so willingly. Disillusioned peasants, or rogue monks seeking power in a world where famine and plague claimed lives indiscriminately, their desperation leading to rituals that promised resurrection, but delivered only deeper graves. Zoom out for a moment and envision the sprawling underbelly of a medieval monastery stretching beneath you, like a labyrinth of forgotten sins. Vaults carved from limestone that weep eternal tears of groundwater, housing not just scrolls but relics smuggled from the Holy Land, fragments of the true cross, or thorns from Christ's crown. Debated by academics as authentic miracles or clever forgeries crafted by relic merchants to fleece pilgrims, a commerce as ruthless as today's counterfeit luxury goods market, where knockoffs fool the eager eye. Your heart pounds unevenly as you decipher more. The script revealing steps for a black mass circling counterclockwise around an altar, draped in black cloth woven from unbleached linen, chanting invocations to summon entities that some historians contend were psychological archetypes rather than demons, drawn from Jungian shadows long before the man theorized them. A shocking element in how participants allegedly consumed hosts, baked with menstrual blood or ashes from executed heretics. Customs twisted into evidence during trials like those of Gilles de Rais in the 15th century, a nobleman accused of sacrificing children in satanic rites. His confessions extracted under torture that included the Spanish boot crushing his legs until bones splintered like dry twigs. Sad in the way his story blends Bluebeard folklore with real atrocities, empathy surging for the innocent victims caught in the web of his depravity, or the Inquisitor's zeal. The torch flickers lower, its light dimming as wax drips onto the floor with soft plops that echo like distant footsteps, mutating the flame motif from the grove's leaping fires to this waning glow that casts your shadow elongated and monstrous against the wall, a sarcastic commentary on how these rituals amplified inner demons, turning ordinary folk into caricatures of evil in the eyes of their accusers, worse than a viral social media smear campaign that spirals out of control overnight. You roll the scroll further, fingers cramping from the cold that seeps deeper into your joints, each movement sending a shiver up your arms as the text delves into sensory details of the rites incense burned from sulphur and henbane that stung the eyes and induced coughing fits, debated as methods to achieve trance, or simply to mask the stench of unwashed bodies huddled in fear. An absurd historical tidbit, where participants wore masks fashioned from goat hides, tanned with urine, the acrid smell lingering for days like a bad decision you can't wash off, much like regretting that late-night online purchase that arrives reeking of cheap plastic. The isolation presses heavier now, the cellar's walls closing in with their damp embrace. No sounds from above penetrating the thick earth, leaving you alone with these revelations that twist your gut tighter, a psychological chill that mutates the earlier doubt into full-blown unease, as if the words themselves are alive, whispering temptations of power through knowledge that comes at the cost of your sanity. Shocking in how many scholars met similar fates burned or exiled for possessing such texts, like Michael Servetus in the 16th century, executed for his anatomical discoveries that challenged doctrine, his pyre fueled by his own books in a sad irony that echoes the destruction of the Library of Alexandria centuries before. Zoom out again and see the cellar as part of a vast network beneath Europe's cathedrals. Tunnels dug by monks for escape during sieges, but repurposed for hiding heretical tomes. Debated as bastions of free thought or dens of depravity, where secret societies like the Rosicrucians later claimed descent, their manifestos promising enlightenment through alchemy and Kabbalah. A factual evolution from medieval occultism to Renaissance mysticism that birthed modern science, yet carried the scars of persecution. Your breath comes in shallow bursts, the musty air thickening as the torch sputters dangerously low, forcing you to hurry through the final passages that describe the climax of a ritual, ecstatic dances around inverted crosses carved from yew wood, toxic and hallucinogenic, where participants collapsed in fits that inquisitors label possession, but physicians now debate as ergot poisoning from contaminated rye. An absurd cause behind many witch accusations, like blaming a bad trip on tainted brownies at a party gone awry. The empathy wells for those ensnared. Women healers branded sorceresses for brewing potions that eased childbirth pains, their knowledge lost to flames in a world that feared the unknown. Sarcastic in how the church condemned what it couldn't control, much like censoring books today under the guise of protection. As you re-roll the scroll, fingers numb and ink-smeared, a final drop of water splashes onto your hand, cold as accusation, and you feel the forbidden hunger subside into a hollow ache. The parchment's secrets sealed once more, but the enigmatic symbols etched in blood-red wax await in shadowed chambers, promising alliances forged in firelight that may bind or break you utterly. You clasp clammy palms around the sputtering fire in the shadowed chamber, the flames licking at the edges of a crude hearth carved from the cellar's stone floor, their heat a meagre defense against the pervasive chill that seeps from the walls like an unrelenting fog, mutating the damp rot motif from the scroll's musty decay to this acrid smoke that curls into your nostrils, stinging your eyes with tears that blur the faces of your fellow initiates huddled close, their skin slick with sweat from the confined air thick as a fever dream. And you feel the iron tang on your tongue evolve once more, now tasting like the rusty chains dangling from the ceiling above, remnants perhaps of forgotten prisoners who once swore similar oaths here during the height of the Inquisition's fervour, when Dominican friars roamed Europe with papal bulls authorising the extraction of confessions through fire and iron. A factual era in the 13th century where over 80 000 were accused of heresy in southern France alone, their trials debated by historians as genuine hunts for devils, or cynical land grabs by the crown, shocking in how entire villages were raised under the guise of purifying souls, sad in the empathy you harbour for those nameless victims whose screams might still echo in these very stones, their desperation mirroring your own as the fire's warmth battles the cold sweat beading on your forehead, each drop tracing salty paths down your temples like accusations you can't wipe away. The embers pop and hiss, sending sparks upward to die against the low ceiling blackened by years of such gatherings, and your muscles ache from the tension of holding hands in this circle of strangers, palms pressed together in a pact that binds tighter than iron shackles once used on Templar knights, arrested en masse on that fateful Friday the 13th in 1307, their wealth confiscated by a debt-ridden King Philip IV, who spread rumours of their spitting on the cross during initiations. An absurd tidbit where they allegedly inflated pig bladders as makeshift masks to conceal identities during rituals. Grotesque balloons that wheezed with every breath like deflating party favours at a doomed celebration. Ironic in how such crude disguises were meant to protect but often led to betrayal when one member's bladder burst mid-ceremony, exposing faces to spies lurking in the shadows, much like getting ghosted in a group chat where one errant screenshot unravels the whole thread, leaving you exposed and abandoned in the digital void. Your grip tightens involuntarily as the leader, a hooded figure whose voice rasps like gravel under boots, intones the allegiance oath. Words that slither into your ears, promising brotherhood and hidden knowledge from ancient grimoires, smuggled from Byzantine libraries after the Fourth Crusade sacked Constantinople in 1204. Treasures debated as lost wisdom or cursed artifacts that brought plague and misfortune to their keepers. Shocking in the scale of that betrayal, where Christian crusaders turned on fellow believers for gold and relics. Sad for the scholars who watched irreplaceable texts burn in the flames, their ashes scattering like forgotten dreams across the Bosporus, and you feel the smoke irritating your lungs now. Each inhale a laboured cough that mutates the metallic tang into a burning scratch at the back of your throat, as if swallowing embers that glow with the resentment of those long-dead librarians whose works could have illuminated the world, but instead fueled literal fires of ignorance. The chamber's walls press in closer, their rough-hewn surfaces glistening with condensation that drips steadily like a torturer's water clock, each plop echoing in the silence between oaths, and your knees bruise against the cold stone as you kneel in this ritual posture. The position demanded by the pact to symbolize submission, a historical echo of the flagellant processions during the Black Death in the 1340s, where penitents whipped themselves bloody in public squares to appease a wrathful god. Debated by academics as mass hysteria, induced by ergot-tainted bread or genuine spiritual fervour, amid a pandemic that claimed a third of Europe's population. An absurd practice where they sewed iron spikes into their whips for extra penance. Ironic like signing up for a gym membership only to injure yourself on day one with overzealous weights. The pain self-inflicted yet somehow purifying in its delusion. Your shoulders sag under the weight of the hooded robe they've draped over you, wool heavy with absorbed moisture that clings like a lover's unwanted embrace, mutating the wet wool motif from the alley's fog-soaked garment to this sodden shroud that chafes your skin raw at the collar, the itch a constant distraction as beads of sweat mingle with the dampness, creating rivulets that trickle down your back like accusations you can't scratch away. And the fire's dim light flickers across the initiates' faces, revealing eyes wide with a mix of fervour and doubt, their breath sinking in ragged harmony as the oath builds to its climax, promising eternal loyalty under penalty of unspeakable ends, dismemberment or burial alive, customs whispered in the annals of the Assassin's Order from the Middle East, who used hashish to induce visions in recruits before sending them on suicidal missions, a factual influence on European societies debated as cultural exchange from the Crusades, or exaggerated Orientalist tales to demonize Muslim foes. Shocking in how these Fedayeen leaped from cliffs to prove devotion. Sad for the young men brainwashed into believing paradise awaited, their leaps as futile as jumping into a scam investment hyped by a slick influencer, only to crash into financial ruin. The leader passes a dagger around the circle, its blade glinting dully in the ember glow, and when it reaches you, the handle is warm from prior grips, slick with collective sweat that makes your palms slip as you prick your thumb anew, the blood welling up to mingle in a shared chalice, fashioned from a hollowed skull, perhaps a sheep's, but whispered to be human, an absurd tidbit from bog-body rituals of Celtic druids preserved in peat for millennia. Their sacrifices debated as voluntary or coerced to appease harvest gods. Ironic like donating blood at a drive only to find out it's for a vampire-themed party where no one shows up. The prick a minor pain that blooms into a throbbing ache as you watch the crimson drops swirl in the wine. The mixture passed lip to lip in a communion that seals the pact, the taste bitter and coppery, mutating the iron tang into a full-bodied revulsion that coats your mouth like regret after a bad kiss. Zoom out for a breath, and picture the chamber as a node in a vast underground network snaking beneath medieval castles and abbeys across the continent, tunnels dug in secret during times of siege like the 100 Years' War, where English longbowmen rained arrows on French knights at Agincourt in 1415, their mud-choked fields a sensory hell of blood and filth that drove survivors to form brotherhoods for mutual aid, debated by historians as chivalric orders or opportunistic gangs preying on chaos. A factual bloodbath where rain turned the ground to mire, trapping armored men like flies in honey, shocking in the disparity of technology that felled nobles with peasant weapons. Sad for the archers whose fingers bled from drawing strings, their calluses as thick as the oath they swore in hidden covens afterward to protect their craft from royal bans. Your vision blurs from the smoke's sting, tears streaming unchecked as the oath concludes with a collective murmur that vibrates through your chest. The words binding you to this alliance already fraying under whispers of deceit you overhear, from the edges a sidelong glance, a hesitant grip that plants seeds of doubt deeper than the thorn scratches from the grove, the psychological chill returning as isolation creeps in despite the crowded space. Each initiate a potential traitor in a game where loyalty is as fleeting as the fire's warmth, sarcastic in how these pacts promise power but delivered paranoia, worse than joining a startup team only to watch it implode from internal backstabbing before the first funding round. The embers dim further as the ritual winds down, the leader snuffing torches one by one with a hiss that echoes like extinguished hopes, leaving only the central fire to sputter on, its light casting long shadows that twist like accusations across the floor, and you feel the muscles in your back knot from the prolonged kneel, the ache spreading like roots through your limbs as fatigue sets in, the sweat cooling rapidly in the chamber's draft that whistles through unseen cracks, carrying faint echoes of midnight processions from above, where forgotten ruins await your next step in this endless night of secrets and suspicions. The weight of the pact pressing heavy on your chest like an unspoken burden you can't yet shake. The air grows heavier with the scent of extinguished wax and lingering smoke, each breath a reminder of the fragility of these bonds. And as the group disperses into the gloom, hooded figures melting into the shadows like ghosts retreating at dawn, you rise unsteadily, legs numb from the stone's bite, the bloodied thumb throbbing in rhythm with your pulse, a constant pulse of pain that mutates the sensory struggle into a lingering thrum of unease. The chambers chill, deepening as the fire fades to glowing coals, their red eyes winking out one by one, leaving you to navigate the darkness toward the exit, where silent marches through ruined abbeys beckon under the windswept skies, promising procession but delivering only the gnawing whisper of alliances teetering on the edge of collapse. Your bare soles throb with each step on the jagged cobblestones of the ruined abbey, the sharp edges biting into your flesh like accusations from the past that refuse to dull with time, sending jolts of pain up your legs that mingle with the lingering ache from the chamber's kneel, mutating the stone's cold bite from the cellar floor into this uneven path that forces you to hobble forward in the midnight procession, the wind howling through the crumbling arches like the wails of injustices long buried but never silenced, whipping your hooded robe against your body with a force that presses the wet wool heavier than unspoken burdens, its sodden weight clinging like a shroud soaked in the night's dew and your own sweat from the fire's fleeting warmth, now evolved into this chilling gale that carries the faint, salty tang of distant seas, or perhaps the tears of those who marched here before, a sensory struggle that numbs your toes while the metallic taste on your tongue mutates once more from the bloodied chalice to a gritty residue of dust kicked up by the shuffling feet ahead, each particle grinding between your teeth like the remnants of forgotten feasts turned to ash in the abbey's sacked halls, and you wonder if the monks who once tended these grounds in the 12th century felt a similar throb in their sandaled feet during Vespers, before the Albigensian crusade razed their sanctuaries in a factual purge ordered by Pope Innocent III, where crusaders slaughtered 20,000 in Béziers alone, under the infamous decree to kill all and let God sort them, debated by historians as a holy war against Cathar heretics, who rejected material wealth or merely a land grab by northern French nobles eyeing southern riches. Shocking in how the abbey stones still bear scorch marks from the fires that consumed libraries of illuminated manuscripts. Sad for the scribes whose quills scratched out pleas for mercy that went unread amid the flames. Their inkpots shattered like fragile hopes in a world where faith turned to fanaticism overnight, much like scrolling through a heated online debate that escalates into doxing and digital exiles before you can hit refresh. The procession moves in silence, a line of hooded figures weaving through the abbey's skeletal remains' collapsed vaults, yawning open to the starless sky like mouths frozen in eternal screams. Vines twisting over fallen columns that once supported roofs echoing with Gregorian chants now replaced by the wind's mournful dirge. And your bare feet encounter a puddle pooled in a cratered flagstone. The water icy and foul with the rot of decayed leaves and perhaps the leavings of nocturnal creatures, splashing up your calves with a cold that seeps deeper than winter frost, mutating the damp rot motif from the cellar's mildew to this stagnant brew that smells of earthworms and forgotten cellars, heavy enough to make your stomach churn as you step onward. The group halting briefly at a weathered cross tilted askew in the overgrown courtyard, its base eroded by centuries of rain that some absurd tidbit claims was once blessed with holy water, mixed with crushed relics, bones of saints ground fine like pepper to ward off demons. A practice debated as genuine piety or superstitious folly by medieval chroniclers who argued whether such mixtures truly repelled evil or merely masked the stench of unburied dead during plagues. Ironic like sprinkling essential oils on a musty gym bag, hoping to banish the funk instead of just washing it, the sarcasm biting as you touch the cross's rough wood, splintering under your fingers and drawing a fresh prick of blood that mixes with the puddle's grime, a minor wound that throbs in sync with your souls, amplifying the isolation as the wind isolates each figure in their own cocoon of howling noise. No words exchanged lest they carry to unseen ears beyond the ruins. Zoom out for a whisper, and behold the abbey as a ghostly sentinel on the fringes of a medieval landscape scarred by endless wars. Fields once tilled by serfs now overgrown with thistles that prick like the injustices of feudal lords who taxed the poor into rebellion. Sparking peasant uprisings like the Jacquerie in 1358, where villagers armed with pitchforks stormed castles only to be massacred by knights in gleaming plate. A factual bloodletting debated as class warfare or divine retribution for defying the social order ordained by God. Shocking in the brutality where rebels' heads were spiked on gates as warnings. Sad for the families left to starve in the aftermath. Their cries lost to history like whispers in this very wind that now tugs at your robe, pulling you forward as the procession resumes, your steps synchronized with the others in a rhythmic shuffle that echoes off the broken walls. The cobblestones slick now with a light mist that falls like veiled tears from the clouds above, mutating the wet wool into an even heavier burden that chafes your shoulders raw. The fabrics itch, a constant companion like an ill-fitting uniform in a dead-end job where the boss's demands weigh more than any paycheck, and you pass a toppled statue of a saint, its marble face chipped and moss-covered, eyes staring blankly at the procession as if judging the hooded marchers who pause to murmur invocations at its base. Words that blend Latin fragments with heretical twists, prayers for protection from the church's own hunters. A historical echo of the Waldensians who wandered these lands preaching poverty in the 12th century, debated by scholars as proto-Protestants challenging papal corruption or dangerous schismatics sowing chaos in a fragile Christendom. Absurd in how they carried no possessions but hidden scriptures sewn into their garments, pages that rustled like secrets against skin, much like smuggling notes in your pocket during a high-stakes exam where one wrong glance spells expulsion. The sarcasm evident as you imagine those wanderers' bare feet faring no better on these stones, their calluses thick as the faith that drove them to martyrdom at the stake, where flames consumed flesh in spectacles meant to terrify, yet often inspired more converts in a sad cycle of persecution breeding resilience. The wind picks up, carrying distant thunder that rumbles like approaching hoofbeats of inquisitorial riders, and your group quickens pace through a cloister overgrown with ivy that snags at your ankles like grasping hands from the grave, leaves whispering against your skin in a sensory caress that's more menace than comfort. The air growing colder as you descend stone steps worn smooth by countless feet into the abbey's crypt, where the procession halts before a row of sarcophagi cracked open by time or looters after the dissolution under Henry VIII in the 16th century, when English monasteries were stripped bare for royal coffers. A factual plunder debated as religious reform or greedy secularization that left ruins like this haunted by displaced monks' ghosts. Shocking in the wealth funneled to fun wars and mistresses. Sad for the brothers evicted into poverty, their vows broken by a king's whim, much like a corporate merger dissolving lifelong careers overnight, and you touch a lid's edge. dust flaking off to coat your fingers in a powdery film that tastes faintly of lime when you absently lick it away. Mutating the metallic tang into a chalky bitterness that coats your mouth like regret after speaking out of turn. The crypt's air stale and thick with the scent of undisturbed earth, heavy enough to press on your chest as the leader lights a single candle from a hidden flint, its flame flickering to life with a hiss that illuminates faded frescoes on the walls, depictions of Judgment Day where souls are weighed on scales tipped by demons, debated by art historians as moral warnings or subversive critiques of clerical hypocrisy. Absurd in how the painters mixed pigments with egg yolk for tempera that sometimes soured mid-work, leaving a vinegary stink that lingered for weeks like a bad kitchen experiment gone awry. The candle's wax drips slowly, pooling on the stone like tears, and the group forms a tighter circle, hands linking once more in silent solidarity that feels fragile against the wind's intrusion through cracks above, each gust extinguishing the flame briefly before it sputters back, mutating the fire motif from the chamber's embers to this tenuous light that casts elongated shadows, dancing like accusations across the tombs, the psychological chill deepening as doubts whisper in your ear, whispers of members who vanished after such marches, betrayed by infiltrators posing as brethren, a historical pattern in the Rosicrucian manifestos of the 17th century that promised invisible colleges of wise men but sparked witch hunts instead. Sarcastic, like joining an exclusive club only to find it's a pyramid scheme peddling enlightenment for a fee you can't afford, the isolation amplifying every creak of settling stone as if the abbey itself mourns its desecration, and as the candle burns lower, the procession prepares to ascend, your bare feet protesting with fresh blisters that weep clear fluid mixing with the dust, a sensory throb that carries you upward into the night, where enigmatic symbols etched in blood-red wax await in shadowed chambers, their seals promising revelations that may unlock doors to ceremonies shrouded in even greater injustice and creeping dread. The wind fading to a murmur behind you like a secret half-told, you press your thumb into the warm, blood-red wax that yields like flesh under pressure, the seal's surface pricking your skin with a sharpness that draws a fresh bead of crimson to mingle with the molten substance, sealing the enigmatic symbol onto the parchment you've been handed in this shadowed chamber beneath the abbey's crypt. The air here thicker than before with the tangy scent of heated resin mixed with the faint, underlying rot of ancient bones stacked in niches along the walls, mutating the damp rot motif from the crypt's stagnant puddles to this viscous drip that hardens quickly in the chill draught, whispering through unseen vents, cooling the wax against your fingertip with a sudden bite that echoes the cobblestone's jab from the procession, your nail catching on the raised emblem, a pentagram intertwined with a cross, debated by historians as a Templar code for hidden treasures, or a Luciferian inversion mocking the Trinity. Factual remnants from the Order's trials where such seals authenticated documents smuggled during the 1307 arrests. Shocking in how King Philip's agents forged similar ones to plant evidence of heresy. Sad for the knights who watched their brothers' confessions extracted via the rack, limbs stretched until joints popped like overripe fruit in a market stall. Their screams a symphony of broken faith in chambers not unlike this one, where the wind's howl from above filters down as a muffled lament, pressing the heavy robe tighter against your sweat-dampened skin, the wet wool now mutating into a sticky second hide that chafes at your elbows with every movement, the itch a relentless distraction like scrolling through endless notifications on a phone that won't stop buzzing in the dead of night. Ironic in how these symbols promise protection, but often sealed fates worse than a spam email leading to identity theft. Your eyes watering from the acrid fumes rising from the ceiling candle, its flames sputtering in the draught like the embers from earlier, mutating the fire motif from the procession's tenuous glow to this controlled burn that illuminates the intricate lines etched into the wax. Lines that some absurd tidbit claims were drawn with quills dipped in ink, blended from crushed beetle shells and vinegar, a medieval recipe for indelible red that stained fingers for weeks like a bad tattoo, regret from an impulsive night out. The chamber's stone walls glistening with condensation that beads and trickles like sweat on a fevered brow, each drop plopping onto the floor with a rhythmic echo that amplifies the isolation creeping through your veins, deeper than the throb in your thumb where the prick lingers as a dull pulse, sinking with your heartbeat in this confined space where the air tastes of dust and decayed sanctity. the metallic tang evolving yet again from the crypt's chalky residue to this waxy bitterness that coats your lips when you lick them nervously, as if sampling the forbidden fruit of knowledge these seals guard. Seals that unlock doors to ceremonies shrouded in injustice and creeping dread. Your hands trembling slightly as you hand the sealed parchment back to the leader, whose hooded eyes gleam with a fervor that borders on madness. The physical event unfolding as the group gathers around a low altar draped in faded velvet, scavenged from sacked churches during the Yule-site wars of the 15th century, where Bohemian reformers hurled icons from windows in defenestrations that sparked revolts against Catholic excess, debated by scholars as proto-Reformation sparks or mere peasant uprisings fueled by economic woes. Shocking in how wagons fortified with chains became mobile fortresses rolling over imperial troops. Sad for the widows left in the wake of battles where faith clashed with steel. Their laments carried on winds not unlike this one that now rattles a loose shutter above, letting in a sliver of moonlight that cuts through the gloom like an accusatory blade, illuminating the symbols on the altar runes carved into wood that some claim derived from Norse Futhark, adapted by Teutonic knights during Baltic Crusades. Absurd in how they etched them with knives heated over coals mixed with wolf fat for supposed potency. A slippery concoction that burned nostrils like sniffing expired glue in a craft gone wrong, and you feel the empathy swell for those knights who bore such marks on their shields, returning from frozen campaigns with frostbitten toes that turned gangrenous, their oaths to the order, a sad irony when the Pope dissolved them in 1525, scattering members like leaves in this very wind that tugs at your robe's hem, the fabric's weight pulling you down as if the earth itself demands submission, your bare feet still raw from the march now standing on a mat of rushes strewn across the floor, prickly and damp with absorbed moisture that squelches under your weight, mutating the sensory struggle from the procession's jagged stones to this spongy discomfort that soaks into your souls like a persistent doubt. The rushes whispering with each shift like secrets half overheard in a crowded bar where one wrong word sparks a brawl. Sarcastic in how these symbols, meant to bind in unity, often unravelled into accusations of treason, worse than a group project where one slacker dooms the whole team with plagiarised slides. The leader breaking the seal you've just made with a ritual knife, the wax cracking like brittle bones underfoot, revealing instructions for the next rite, an invocation scribbled in cipher that you strain to decipher in the flickering light, the candle's wax dripping onto your wrist with a hot sting that cools to a sticky residue, blending pain with the chill draft that snakes up your legs, numbing your calves while the throb in your thumb intensifies, a constant reminder of the blood you've spilled willingly. Shocking in how such small wounds symbolise larger sacrifices in societies like the Carbonari of 19th century Italy, who used wax seals on revolutionary missives during Risorgimento plots against Austrian rule, debated as Masonic offshoots or independent freedom fighters, their ceremonies in hidden grottos echoing these medieval ones, with oaths sworn on daggers plunged into earth. Absurd tidbits of charcoal-smeared faces to mimic miners as disguise. Ironic, like donning a fake moustache for a heist, only to have it fall off mid-escape, leaving you exposed and ridiculous in the eyes of pursuers. And as the invocation begins, the group's voices rising in a low hum that vibrates through the stone, you feel the creeping dread solidify like the wax on your skin, the symbol's meanings unfolding in your mind as keys to forbidden doors, portals to knowledge that promises enlightenment but delivers paranoia, the wind outside rattling louder as if protesting the right, carrying echoes of cloistered confessions from ages past where monks whispered sins in similar shadows, their breaths mingling with candle smoke in acts of penance that bordered on self-torment. Sad for the souls who sought absolution only to find deeper guilt in the Church's labyrinthine doctrines, debated by Reformation historians as catalysts for Luther's 95 Theses nailed in 1517, a factual hammer blow that splintered Christendom like wax under pressure. Shocking in the indulgences sold like tickets to heaven, peddled by Tetzel with rhymes that rang hollow as this chamber's echoes, your own voice joining the hum reluctantly, the words foreign on your tongue yet familiar in their pull toward the unknown, the metallic tang sharpening with each syllable as if tasting the iron of chains that bound dissenters, mutating into a full-bodied revulsion that coats your palate like wax residue. The chamber's air growing heavier with collective exhalations that fog the altar's surface, beads of moisture forming like dew on a grave, and you glance at the initiates' faces, shadowed and strained, empathy flooding for their hidden stories, perhaps a disgraced artisan fleeing guild debts, or a widow escaping arranged remarriage, drawn to this society for solace in an era where the Black Death's shadow lingered, claiming lives indiscriminately and birthing flagellant cults that whipped through streets in ecstatic agony, absurd in their belts studded with nails that drew blood with every lash, sarcastic like joining a fitness trend that promises abs but delivers only bruises and regret, the wind's howl peaking as the invocation crests, rattling the shutter until it bangs open briefly, admitting a gust that snuffs the candle in a puff of smoke, plunging the chamber into momentary darkness where the symbols seem to glow faintly in afterimage, a psychological chill racing up your spine like fingers tracing accusations, the dread coalescing into visions of cloistered confessions amid flickering candles that await in the next shadowed recess, their wax dripping like tears while the air thickens with judgment and unspoken anguish, the shutter slamming shut as if sealing your fate in this endless night of binding rites and fraying trusts. Your trembling fingers trace the raised seals etched in blood-red wax on the chamber's hidden door, the surface warm and yielding at first like congealed fat from a forgotten feast, but pricking your fingertips with tiny, unseen barbs that draw pinpricks of blood to the surface, mingling with the residue in a sticky smear that tastes sharply metallic on your tongue when you instinctively lick the wound. The tang evolving from the procession's gritty dust to this coppery fear that floods your mouth like biting down on a rusted key, hidden in a loaf of bread during a prison escape. A shocking custom, some historians debate, was used by medieval captives to smuggle tools past guards in the dungeons of the Bastille precursor towers, where political prisoners like the man in the iron mask languished in the 17th century under Louis XIV's secretive reign. Factual whispers of his identity ranging from a disgraced valet to the king's twin brother, debated as royal paranoia or elaborate cover-up to preserve the Sun King's divine image. Shocking in how the mask's velvet lining hid a face unseen for decades, sad for the soul trapped in perpetual twilight. His meals slid through slots without a word, empathy surging through you as your own fingertips throb with the prick's after sting. The wax's heat fading rapidly in the chamber's draught that carries a chill seeping from cracks in the stone like accusations leaking from sealed confessions, mutating the wet wool motif from the abbey's sodden robe to this clammy film, coating your skin where sweat meets the cooling residue, heavy and tacky like applying expired lotion that refuses to absorb, leaving you slick and uncomfortable in the dim light cast by a single lantern hung from a rusted hook, its flame flickering with a hiss that mutates the fire motif from the crypt's sputtering candle to this oily glow that dances shadows across the symbols, illuminating their intricate swirls, interlocked serpents devouring tails in Ouroboros loops. Symbols some absurd tidbit claims were inked onto vellum with quills dipped in squid ink, harvested from Mediterranean shores during Venetian trade monopolies in the 14th century, the ink's blackness so deep it was said to swallow light like a black hole in a scholar's fever dream. Ironic, like scrolling through a dark mode app, only to have the battery drain faster from the contrast. The sarcasm biting as you realise these seals, meant to protect arcane knowledge, often unlocked doors to trials where the accused were drowned in rivers to test their innocence if they floated, which, if they sank, absolved but dead. A medieval ordeal debated by legal historians as divine judgment or crude mob justice that executed thousands during the Valais witch hunts of the 1420s, where Swiss valleys echoed with screams of over 500 burned alive, factual pyres fueled by confessions wrung from thumbscrews that crushed bones like walnuts in a vice. Shocking in the scale of hysteria sparked by a single accusation of crop failure blamed on sorcery. Sad for the midwives and healers whose herbal lore was twisted into evidence of pacts with the devil, their poultices of mandrake and belladonna plants that numbed pain but induced visions branded as flying ointments for sabbats. Empathy welling for those women who birthed generations only to be betrayed by the very communities they served. Much like a whistleblower in a corporate scandal getting fired while the executives walk free with golden parachutes. Your breath quickening as the seal gives way with a soft crack, the door creaking open on hinges that groan like the joints of an old man rising from prayer, revealing a narrow passageway lined with niches holding dusty tomes bound in human skin, or so the Whispers claim. Anthropodermic bibliophagy, a practice debated as macabre trophy-making from executed criminals in the 16th century, or mere leatherwork myth perpetuated by sensationalists like the Binders, who crafted volumes for eccentric collectors during the Renaissance. Absurd in how they tanned hides with urine and oak bark, the stench lingering for months like a gym locker forgotten over summer break. The passageway's air turning denser with each step, heavy with the scent of aged paper and mildew that clings to your lungs like fog in a harbour, mutating the damp rot into this powdery decay that tickles your throat into a suppressed cough. The sound echoing ahead where the lantern's light barely penetrates, casting your shadow elongated and distorted against the walls etched with more symbols, alchemical sigils for mercury and sulphur, elements blended in retorts by figures like Paracelsus in the 16th century, who dosed patients with laudanum tinctures that eased pain but addicted souls, debated as pioneering pharmacology or quackery that poisoned as often as it healed, shocking in his autopsy dissections that defied church bans on cutting the dead, sad for the cadavers stolen from gallows under moonless skies, their unnamed stories lost to the scalpel's quest for knowledge, and you feel the creeping dread solidify as your pricked fingertips brush the walls for balance, the stone cold and slick with condensation that drips onto your head like accusatory tears, each drop a sensory jolt that runs down your neck under the robe, soaking the wool further into a sodden weight that pulls at your shoulders like the burdens of those who carved these tunnels miners in the silver shafts of medieval Saxony, where Holy Roman emperors like Charles IV in the 14th century exploited labourers in conditions debated as feudal necessity or exploitative hellscapes that collapsed lungs with dust and bent spines from endless stooping, absurd tidbits of canaries carried in cages to detect poisonous gases, their songs silencing as warnings more reliable than any alchemical divining rod. Ironic, like relying on a glitchy app to track your fitness, only to have it crash mid-run, leaving you lost in the woods without GPS. The sarcasm evident as you emerge into a larger antechamber, where the symbols multiply on a central pedestal, holding a brass astrolabe engraved with celestial maps, instruments used by navigators during the Age of Discovery, but co-opted by occultists for divining fates, factual tools like those of John Dee in Elizabeth Anne's court, who scried in obsidian mirrors for angelic conversations, debated as genuine mysticism or Elizabethan espionage codes to spy on rivals, shocking in how his library of 4,000 volumes was ransacked by mobs fearing his sorcery, sad for the polymath whose quests for universal knowledge ended in poverty and exile, empathy flooding as you imagine his trembling hands tracing similar symbols, the metallic tang sharpening on your tongue from the brass's faint odour wafting in the still air, mutating into a brassy bitterness that coats your palate like chewing on a coin to test its purity in a market rife with counterfeits. The antechamber's gloom pierced by slits high in the walls, admitting whispers of wind that carry distant chants from above. The physical event cresting as you align the astrolabe's arms according to the seal's instructions, a click resounding as hidden mechanisms whir to life, unlocking a concealed panel that slides open with a grind of stone on stone, revealing stairs descending into deeper darkness where ceremonies await, shrouded in the injustice of forgotten inquisitions and the creeping dread of what revelations lurk below, your pricked fingertips pulsing with anticipation or warning as the wind dies to a sigh, leaving the air thick with unspoken judgments that press like unseen hands on your chest. The symbols glow, fading in your mind's eye like embers winking out in a hearth gone cold, a strange visual of serpents uncoiling into infinity as you step downward, the door sealing behind you with a finality that echoes through the empty space above, the isolation deepening into a psychological chill that wraps your soul like wax hardening over a flame, snuffing it slowly as cloistered confessions amid flickering candles beckon from the abyss below, their wax dripping like tears while the air grows thick with judgment and unspoken anguish, the stairs spiralling into shadows where every footfall echoes your descent into the heart of the society's veiled truths. Your voice quavers in the wax-scented haze of the cloistered chamber deep beneath the abbey's ruins, spilling sins from your lips like overripe fruit bursting under pressure as the flickering candles cast elongated shadows that dance across the stone walls like judgmental spectres eavesdropping on your every stuttered word. and you can't help but wonder if these confessions were ever truly absolved in medieval monasteries, where monks whispered similar admissions through iron grills in confessional booths carved from oak harvested from sacred groves. A shocking custom, some historians debate, was designed to foster spiritual intimacy or merely to control the flock by cataloguing their vulnerabilities in ledgers hidden from prying eyes. Your throat roar from the effort as the words tumble out. Admissions of doubt in the society's oaths. Fears of betrayal lurking in the hooded glances of your companions. Regrets over the blood pricked from your thumb that now stains the wax seal you clutch like a talisman gone sour. The air growing thick with the judgment of unseen ears behind a lattice screen where the confessor sits shrouded in darkness. Their breath audible in the pauses between your halting phrases, heavy and rhythmic like a bellows stoking an invisible forge, mutating the fire motif from the antechamber's sputtering lantern to these candle flames that sputter and spit wax droplets onto the flagstone floor with soft plops that echo like accusations landing in a silent courtroom, each drip cooling into hardened tears that you step on accidentally, the crunch under your bare sole sending a jolt up your leg already throbbing from the descent's uneven stairs, the sensory struggle intensifying as the wax's acrid smoke curls into your nostrils, stinging your eyes with tears that blur the confessor's outline into a ghostly blur, heavy with the scent of beeswax rendered from hives tended by monastic beekeepers in the 12th century, who harvested honeycombs under threat of excommunication if they withheld tithes, debated by economic historians as a divine economy or feudal exploitation where abbots amassed wealth from apiaries, while peasants starved during famines like the Great Famine of 1315-1317, that rotted crops in relentless rain. Shocking in how bloated corpses floated in flooded fields as survivors turned to cannibalism in whispered tales suppressed by the church. Sad for the children who gnawed on leather belts for sustenance, their tiny frames wasting away in a world where God's mercy seemed drowned in the deluge. Empathy flooding your chest as you confess a similar gnawing hunger, not for food but for truth, amid the society's veiled promises. Your voice cracking like the wax underfoot as the confessor murmurs absolutions in Latin fragments that sound hollow in the dim glow, the words weaving through the lattice like threads in a tapestry of forgiveness frayed at the edges. Ironic, like confessing to a therapist via a glitchy video call where the connection drops mid-revelation, leaving you hanging in digital limbo worse than a dropped bar of soap in a communal bathhouse. The sarcasm biting as you realize these cloistered admissions, meant to cleanse the soul, often trapped it further in cycles of guilt. Much like doom scrolling through old messages at 3 a.m. only to unearth regrets that keep you awake till dawn. Your knees bruising on the cold stone kneeler padded thinly with rushes that prick through the fabric, like insistent reminders of earthly discomfort. The position forcing your back to arch in supplication as sweat beads on your brow, despite the chill seeping from the walls, mutating the wet wool into a steaming shroud that clings with the humidity of your own exhalations, mixing with the candle smoke, heavy enough to make breathing a laboured act as if the air itself judges your worth. The confessor's voice dropping lower to probe deeper sins, perhaps the envy you felt during the procession for those who seemed more devout, or the doubt that flickered like these candles when the symbols unlocked forbidden doors, their questions slithering into your ears with a persistence that echoes the interrogations of the Spanish Inquisition in the late 15th century under Torquemeda's iron rule, where conversos Jews forced to convert were grilled in torchlit cells about secret Judaizing practices like lighting Sabbath candles in hidden alcoves, debated by religious historians as a purge of heresy or a xenophobic campaign to consolidate power after the Reconquista. Factual auto da fe, where over 2,000 were burned alive in public spectacles that drew crowds like morbid festivals. Shocking in the garments of shame Sanbenitos painted with flames that the condemned wore as they marched to stakes fueled by olive branches, symbolizing peace twisted into execution pyres. Sad for the families torn apart by anonymous denunciations scribbled on slips dropped into lion-mouthed boxes outside tribunals, their lives unravelling from a neighbour's grudge over a shared well or disputed field. Empathy welling as you imagine their quavering voices in similar confessions, coerced by the threat of the strappado where arms were wrenched behind backs until shoulders dislocated with pops like cracking wax seals. Your own shoulders aching now from the hunched posture as the confessor presses for more, the candlelight waning as wax pools larger on the floor, dripping like the tears you fight back from the sting of smoke and self-reproach, the metallic tang sharpening on your tongue from biting your lip in hesitation, mutating into a bloody flavour that coats your mouth like the residue of unspoken truths. The chamber's gloom deepening as one candle gutters out with a final puff, its smoke curling upward in a lazy spiral that mutates the damp rot into a sooty haze clinging to the lattice. Heavy with the weight of centuries of similar admissions whispered in monastic cells, where anchorites walled themselves in for life. Debating by ascetic scholars as ultimate devotion or psychological self-torment in pursuit of divine union. Absurd tidbits of their diets restricted to bread and water passed through tiny windows called squints, ironic like subscribing to a meal kit service only to receive stale crackers and tap water month after month. The sarcasm evident as you ponder how these voluntary isolations mirrored the society's enforced secrecy, turning confession into a double-edged sword that absolved yet ensnared, worse than venting to a chatbot that logs every word for targeted ads popping up later to haunt you. Zoom out for a hushed breath and envision the chamber as a vein in the abbey's subterranean heart, pulsing with the echoes of Gregorian chants from above that once filled the nave with harmonious pleas for mercy, before the dissolution stripped the altars bare under Henry VIII's greedy gaze in 1536, where over 800 monasteries were dissolved in a land grab that funded wars and enriched courtiers, debated by Tudor historians as necessary reform against corrupt priors or rapacious secularization that left ghosts wandering ruined cloisters. Factual inventories listing silver chalices melted down for coinage, while libraries were scattered to the winds. Shocking in the speed of the suppression where agents like Thomas Cromwell orchestrated visits that condemned houses for fabricated vices like immorality among the brethren. Sad for the elderly monks pensioned off into poverty, their habits traded for rags as they begged in streets once graced by their processions. Empathy stirring as you confess a parallel fear of dissolution in your own fragile alliance. The confessor's absolutions ringing false in your ears like a bell cracked from overuse, the remaining candles flickering in unison as if breathing with you. Their wax dripping faster now like accelerated heartbeats in the thickening air, laced with unspoken anguish that presses on your chest heavier than the robe's sodden folds. The judgment hanging palpable as the confessor falls silent, leaving you in a void of reflection where sins swirl unresolved like smoke in still air, the lattice's shadows lengthening as another candle dims, mutating the gloom into a velvet darkness that swallows details, your voice trailing off into whispers that echo back mockingly, the rawness in your throat a lingering burn as the session ends, not with peace, but a hollow echo. The door behind the screen creaking open faintly to admit a draught that carries scents of ritual feasts from hidden halls beyond, where bitter herbs await on tongues twisted in ecstasy and torment, the unspoken anguish coalescing into a chill that races down your spine like wax cooling on heated skin, leaving you shivering in the haze as the final candle sputters toward extinction, its light fading like forgiveness withheld in the night. You swallow the acrid herbs that twist your tongue in a tormented delight, the bitter leaves crumbling between your teeth like dried regrets ground fine in a mortar of forgotten sins, their sharpness cutting through the haze of the cloistered chamber, where the confessor's absolutions still echo faintly in your ears like half-heard whispers from behind the lattice, now fading as you step through a low archway into the hidden hall beyond, the air shifting from wax-scented judgment to the heavy aroma of spiced stews simmering in iron cauldrons over a low hearth, the flames crackling with a muted roar that mutates the fire motif from the sputtering candles to this subdued glow casting ruddy light on the long oaken table laden with platters of dark bread, fermented cheeses veined with blue mould that smells of earth and decay, and meats roasted to a glistening char, perhaps venison poached from royal forests during the poaching epidemics of the 14th century, when starving peasants risked hanging for a taste of the king's deer, debated by legal historians as acts of survival rebellion, or mere criminal desperation amid the 100 Years' War's famines that left fields fallow and bellies hollow, shocking in how sheriffs strung up bodies as warnings along woodland paths, sad for the families who watched their providers swing in the wind like macabre scarecrows failing to deter the crows from picking at the remains. Empathy tugging at your chest as you take your seat on a rough bench that digs into your thighs with splintered insistence. The wood worn smooth by generations of similar gatherings in these halls hidden beneath abbeys sacked during the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, where Wat Tyler's rebels stormed London demanding freedom from serfdom, their pitchforks clashing against knightly swords in a factional uprising, sparked by poll taxes that burdened the poor, while nobles feasted on swan and peacock. Absurd tidbits of the rebels' feasts on stolen delicacies like roasted heron tongues, seasoned with saffron imported from distant Saracen markets. Ironic, like crashing a corporate gala, only to gorge on caviar while the hosts call security, the sarcasm evident as you chew the herbs, handed to you by a hooded figure across the table, their face contorted in a grimace of ecstasy that borders on pain, eyes glazing over from the mandrake-laced wine poured from ewers shaped like grinning gargoyles, the liquid sloshing thick and red as blood from a fresh wound. Mutating the metallic tang on your tongue from the wax prick to this herbal bitterness that coats your palate like a veil of forced merriment, heavy enough to make swallowing an effort as the dim light reveals more faces around the table twisted in shared rapture and regret, cheeks flushed from the wine's warmth, warring against the chamber's perpetual chill, seeping from the stone walls draped in faded tapestries, depicting biblical feasts turned heretical. Perhaps the Last Supper inverted with Judas at the head, symbols debated by art historians as subversive critiques of papal gluttony during the Avignon papacy's excesses in the 14th century, where popes like Clement VI hosted banquets with 50 courses while plague ravaged Europe, shocking in the golden peacocks stuffed with live birds that flew out when carved, sad for the servants who slaved in kitchens hot as hellfires, only to eat scraps laced with the same poisons that felled unwanted guests, your own portion arriving on a trencher of stale bread that soaks up the stew's juices, chunks of mystery meat swimming in a gravy thickened with barley and secrets, the flavours exploding on your tongue in a riot of salt and spice that masks something fouler, perhaps nightshade berries for their hallucinogenic bite. An absurd historical tidbit from the Borgia family's infamous dinners in Renaissance Italy, where Cesare and Lucrezia allegedly dosed rivals with cantarella powder hidden in candles that dripped poison into wine below. Ironic, like spiking a colleague's coffee with laxatives during a meeting, only to watch the chaos unfold from afar, the sarcasm biting as you force down another bite, the ecstasy building in your veins like a false warmth that mutates the wet wool of your robe into a steaming cocoon clinging tighter with each swallow. The hall's air thickening with collective exhalations and the sizzle of fat dripping into the hearth. Faces around you contorting further, some laughing manically at unseen visions. Others grimacing in silent torment as the herbs twist guts into knots of regret over oaths sworn too hastily. Bonds laced with the poison of doubt that spreads like venom through a shared vein. Empathy swelling for the initiate beside you whose hands tremble on their cup. Perhaps a former apothecary, fleeing accusations of poisoning wells during the Black Death, scapegoating of Jews in 1348, where mobs burned entire communities alive in Strasbourg's pogroms, debated by genocide scholars as plague-induced hysteria or calculated economic grabs of property left behind. Shocking in the wells, truly tainted by rotting corpses upstream rather than malice. Sad for the children hidden in attics only to suffocate from smoke as flames consumed their homes below. Your own vision blurring at the edges from the wine's grip, the dim light fracturing into halos around the candles that drip wax onto the table, like tears of a feast gone awry. The shared meals binding you in a fellowship that feels as fragile as the bread crumbling in your fingers. Regret pooling in your stomach heavier than the stew, as whispers circulate of past banquets where traitors were unmasked mid-bite. Their throats slit with knives hidden in sleeves like the assassinations at the Banquet of Chestnuts, hosted by Pope Alexander VI in 1501, absurd with courtesans scrambling for scattered nuts, in a Vatican orgy debated as historical fact or Protestant propaganda, to smear the Borgias. Ironic, like a team-building dinner turning into a firing squad announcement, the hall spinning slightly as the ecstasy peaks into torment, faces twisting in a mask of pleasure-pain that mirrors your inner turmoil, the poison of regret seeping deeper as the feast winds down to murmurs and slumped forms, the hearth's flames dying to embers that cast long shadows like fingers pointing accusations, leaving you sated yet hollow, the bitter aftertaste lingering as pursued shadows in narrow labyrinths beckon from the hall's far door, where the wind howls entry to flights through twisting mazes of betrayal and fear, the fellowship fracturing like the bread left uneaten on the table. A sad remnant of unity laced with the inevitable venom of doubt that binds only to break in the creeping night. Your pulse hammers like a trapped animal caged in your chest as you bolt through the damp corridors of the labyrinthine undercroft. The walls closing in with slick stone that brushes your shoulders like accusing fingers slick with condensation, each frantic step echoing off the twisting passages that loop and double back like a serpent devouring its tail. The air thick with the musty reek of mildew and panic sweat that clings to your skin, mutating the damp rot motif from the hall's herbal fumes to this choking vapour rising from puddles splashed underfoot, your bare soles slipping on the slime-coated flagstones that send jolts of pain up your legs, already raw from the feast's heavy stupor, the cries of betrayal ringing behind you, sharp accusations from kin turned foes, their voices warping in the narrow maze like echoes in a well of forgotten sins. Shocking in how medieval labyrinths beneath cathedrals like Chartres were designed as meditative paths for pilgrims tracing finger mazes on stone floors in the 13th century. Debated by architectural historians as symbols of life's convoluted journey toward salvation, or cunning traps for heretics fleeing inquisitors during the Languedoc's oppressions, where Albigensian refugees hid in cave networks, only to be smoked out like rats in a barn fire. Factual suffocations that claimed hundreds in Montsega's 1244 siege. Sad for the women and children who chose the pyre over recantation, their final hymns swallowed by flames that historians argue were fueled by the very scriptures they cherished. Empathy clawing at your throat as you gasp for breath, the metallic tang sharpening on your tongue from biting your cheek in terror, mutating into a bloody froth that tastes of iron chains once used to drag dissenters through these very tunnels during the witch craze of the 16th century in Bamberg, where Prince Bishop Johann Georg II burned over 1,000 in a frenzy of paranoia sparked by crop failures blamed on maleficium. Absurd tidbits of torture devices like the witch's chair studded with spikes heated over coals. Ironic, like sitting on a faulty office chair that pinches just when you need focus, the sarcasm biting as you round a corner into a dead end, heart slamming against ribs like a bird frantic in a chimney flue, the damp walls pressing closer with their glistening slime that drips onto your head like mocking tears, the filth underfoot now a slurry of mud and debris that sucks at your feet with reluctant grips, echoing the cries growing louder betrayed by your own kin whose whispers of doubt at the feast festered into pursuit, their footsteps thundering like the hunts of the wild hunt folklore from Germanic tales woven into Christian demonology, debated as pagan remnants or moral allegories for unchecked sin, shocking in how villagers in the Black Forest nailed doors shut against spectral riders who snatched souls on stormy nights. Sad for the outcasts labelled werewolves and chased with silver-tipped arrows forged in church forges, your breaths ragged as you backtrack through the twist, injustice slicing sharper than any thorn of suspicion from the grove, the maze's narrowness amplifying every scrape of nail on stone as you claw for an exit, the psychological chill deepening into a vice around your lungs, isolation gnawing like vermin in the dark as the pursuers' shadows elongate in the flickering torchlight they carry, a distant glow that promises no warmth but capture, the cries warping into pleas or threats that blend in the echo chamber of betrayal, your heart pounding relentlessly as bone-chilling revelations await under vaulted depths, where truths fester like open sores in the stale air, the labyrinth spitting you out into a lower vault where the damp closes in tighter, leaving you gasping at the edge of unveiling mysteries that chill your bones to the marrow. You gasp at revelations that chill your bones to their marrow in the stale, oppressive air of the underground vault, the chamber's gloom wrapping around you like a shroud woven from forgotten shrouds exhumed from plague pits during the Black Death's rampage in 1348 when mass graves overflowed with bloated corpses stacked like cordwood in London's Charterhouse Square, debated by archaeologists as hasty burials to stem contagion or desperate measures to hide the scale of death that claimed 60% of Europe's population. Shocking in how church bells tolled endlessly until ringers dropped dead at the ropes. Sad for the orphans wandering streets crying for parents whose final breaths bubbled with bloody froth from pneumonic lungs, empathy constricting your throat as you clutch the unlocked panel from the labyrinth's end, its brass mechanism still warm under your pricked fingertips that ooze a sticky blood mixed with dust, the metallic tang on your tongue mutating from the pursuit's bloody froth to this dusty bitterness that coats your palate like ash from pyres, where bodies burned day and night to purify the air thick with decay. The vault's atmosphere heavy and unmoving, laden with the scent of undisturbed earth and mildewed leather from stacks of tomes piled on sagging shelves, carved directly from the bedrock. Their spines cracked like the skin of lepers shunned to colonies outside city walls in the 12th century, where biblical curses branded them unclean, debated by medical historians as Hansen's disease spread via trade routes from the east, or divine punishment for sins. Absurd tidbits from treatments like bathing in virgin's blood drawn from executed youths. Ironic, like slathering on a trendy face mask only to discover it's laced with expired yogurt that sours your skin worse than before. The sarcasm slithering through your mind as you pull a volume from the shelf, its pages yellowed and brittle under your touch, crumbling at the edges like the illusions shattering around you with each turned leaf, revealing truths that fester like untreated wounds in the soul diagrams of black mass altars, constructed from desecrated relics stolen from sacked cathedrals during the iconoclastic fury of the 8th century in Byzantium, where Emperor Leo III ordered holy images smashed to curb idolatry, debated as theological reform or political power play to consolidate control over a fracturing empire. Shocking in how mosaics of Christ were pried from walls with chisels that sparked riots, killing thousands in Constantinople's streets. Sad for the artists blinded as punishment for their devotion to divine beauty. Their gouged eyes a metaphor for the blindness of zealots who saw heresy in every brushstroke. Your own eyes watering from the vault's stale dust that swirls in the beam of your lantern's feeble light. The flame guttering low on its wick soaked in tallow, rendered from executed criminals' fat. A historical practice from gibbet sites where bodies hung until birds picked them clean, mutating the fire motif from the hall's hearth embers to this oily flicker that casts grotesque shadows across the pages, illuminating incantations scripted in faded sepia ink, perhaps distilled from walnut galls gathered under full moons. Customs, some esoteric scholars argue aligned with lunar phases for potency, or merely coincided with harvest cycles in rural scriptoria, where monks toiled by candlelight, the underground air pressing heavier on your chest with each inhale, laced with the powdery mildew that clings to your lungs like the isolation gnawing at your psyche, deeper than the wounds on your fingertips that throb with infection's first twinge. A sensory struggle amplified by the vault's oppressive silence, broken only by the drip of groundwater seeping through cracks above, each drop echoing like a heartbeat in an empty tomb. Zoom out for a shadowed glimpse and envision the vault as a buried artery in Europe's subterranean veins, pulsing with suppressed knowledge from the Alumbrados of 16th century Spain, Illuminati precursors persecuted by the Inquisition for claiming direct divine light without clerical mediation, debated as mystical visionaries or heretical egotists challenging the hierarchy, absurd in their trances induced by staring at crucifixes until eyes burned with after-images, ironic like meditating on a smartphone screen till you see spots from blue light overload. The revelations unfolding faster now as you scan accounts of secret societies splintering from betrayals initiates turning informers for pardons during the affair of the poisons in Louis XIV's Versailles, where courtiers like Madame de Montespan allegedly sacrificed infants in black masses for the king's favour, factual scandals that led to 36 executions in the Chambre Ardent's flame-lit trials, shocking in the arsenic-laced powders sold by fortune-tellers to desperate nobles, sad for the midwives accused of supplying aborted fetuses for rituals, their hangings a spectacle for crowds baying like wolves at the scaffold, empathy flooding as you imagine their final gasps mirroring your own laboured breaths in this airless depth, the truths festering like gangrene in an untreated cut, unveiling how these societies promised enlightenment but delivered division, the vault's starless ceiling pressing down like the weight of centuries' suppressed debates. Historians still arguing if black masses were satanic inversions or satirical protests against corrupt clergy who feasted while flocks starved, your vision blurring from the lantern's smoke that stings like unspoken regrets, the metallic tang intensifying as you bite your lip in horror at diagrams of inverted crucifixes fashioned from human bones, exhumed from unconsecrated graves, absurd from ossuaries like Paris's catacombs, stacked with 6 million skeletons relocated in the 18th century to clear overflowing cemeteries, Ironic, like reorganizing a cluttered closet only to have skeletons literally tumble out. The oppressive air turning your stomach as the revelations chill deeper, festering truths that scar the soul like untreated plagues, leaving you gasping in the stale void where fractured bonds await in storm-ravaged nights. The vault's darkness swallowing your lantern's last flicker as the wind howls faintly from cracks above, promising gales that crack alliances like brittle ice under suspicions burning hotter than any fever. You clutch at the shredded cloaks torn by howling gales that lash the storm-ravaged cliffs like vengeful whips cracking across bare skin. The wind's fury ripping fabric with a shriek that drowns your ragged breaths, salt spray stinging open wounds on your hands from the vault's jagged edges, mutating the damp rot into this briny assault that soaks your tattered robes heavier than chains of feudal debt that crushed peasants during the enclosure acts of the 18th century in England, where common lands were fenced off for lord sheep, debated by economic historians as progressive agriculture or class warfare that displaced thousands into urban slums ripe for cholera outbreaks in the 19th century, shocking in how evictions left families starving under open skies as wool profits lined aristocratic pockets, sad for the children who scavenged berries from hedgerows poisoned by runoff from new farms, empathy surging as your own fingers numb in the gale's bite, the cloak's threads unravelling like the alliances cracking under suspicions that burn hotter than any fever. Your kin's whispered doubts from the feast festering into accusations hurled like thunderbolts. Faces contorted in the lightning flashes that illuminate the cliff's sheer drop where waves crash below like judgment's hammer. The air thick with ozone and betrayal's metallic tang now mutating from the vault's dusty residue to this salty sharpness that coats your tongue like tears swallowed in rage. Ironic, like trusting a weather app that predicts sun only to get drenched in a flash flood of lies. The sarcasm whipping through your mind as you grip a fellow initiate's sleeve, their eyes wild with paranoia sparked by the revelations unearthed below scrolls naming spies among the society, planted by inquisitors during the Camisard Revolt in 1702 France, where Huguenot Protestants hid in Cevennes caves to prophesy against Catholic oppression, debated as divine inspiration or hallucinatory madness from ergot-tainted bread, absurd tidbits of their trances where children preached sermons in flawless French despite illiteracy, shocking in how royal dragoons massacred villages in dragonades that forced conversions at sword point, sad for the families torn by informants who traded kin for pardons, your own bonds fracturing now as a gust slams you against the rock face, alliances splintering like brittle ice under the weight of suspicions that ignite arguments mid-storm, voices rising above the roar you hid the scroll or your confession was false, the fever of distrust burning through the cold, empathy clashing with self-preservation as you push away a grasping hand that feels like a noose tightening, the cliff's edge crumbling underfoot like the society's crumbling facade, pebbles tumbling into the abyss below where waves devour them whole, a sensory struggle amplified by the gale's howl, deafening your ears while rain lashes your face like accustory slaps, the shredded cloaks offering no shield as lightning forks the sky, illuminating fractured faces frozen in betrayal, the storm's rage mirroring the internal tempest where loyalties crack wider, suspicions flaring hotter than the fevers that swept through leper colonies, isolated on windswept isles like Spinalonga off Crete, where Venetian rulers quarantined the afflicted in the 16th century, debated as humane isolation or cruel abandonment to slow death, ironic like locking away problems in a junk drawer only to have them spill out messier later, the wind dying momentarily to a moan that carries your group's fragmented pleas into the night, alliances irreparably broken as you stagger onward alone, the chill deepening into a bone ache that promises desperate invocations in isolated chambers ahead, where knees bruise on cold floors pleading to unseen forces, the isolation gnawing at your mind like rats in the dark, amplifying every whisper of despair in the fading gale. Your knees bruise on the unyielding floors of the isolated chamber as you drop in desperation, the cold stone biting through your thin breeches like a lover's betrayal turned to ice, each impact sending shocks up your thighs that mingle with the lingering salt sting from the cliff's gale, mutating the wet wool of your shredded cloak into a frozen shroud that clings stiffly to your skin, heavy with frost that cracks with every shiver, the air in this sealed sanctum thick and still like breath held in a coffin, carrying no wind but the echo of your own ragged pleas to unseen forces that hover just beyond perception. Forces whispered in medieval grimoires as guardian spirits or demonic tempters summoned by hermits in alpine cells during the anchorite movement of the 13th century, where devotees walled themselves into church alcoves with only a squint for light, debated by ecclesiastical historians as ultimate piety or masochistic madness driven by apocalyptic fears post-Mongol invasions, shocking in how they survived on arms passed through slits while their bodies wasted from self-flagellation, with chains forged from donated iron. Sad for the women anchoresses like Julian of Norwich who endured visions of hell in fevered isolation. Their revelations scribbled on parchment, smuggled out like contraband love letters. Empathy knotting your gut as you mirror their posture. Forehead pressed to the stone that weeps condensation, like accusatory tears dripping onto your neck, the metallic tang on your tongue mutating from the storm's ozone to this chalky dryness, from licking cracked lips parched by endless whispers. The isolation gnawing at your mind like rats, scrabbling in the dark corners, where shadows pool thicker than ink spilled from a scribe's pot during the scriptorium purges of the Reformation. When Protestant iconoclasts smashed stained glass and burned illuminated manuscripts in bonfires that lit night skies over Zurich in 1525 under Zwingli's zeal, absurd tidbits of monks hiding texts in hollow statues of saints whose plaster cracked under hammer blows. Ironic, like backing up files to the cloud, only to have a hacker delete them mid-sync. The sarcasm whispering through your delirium as you invoke names from the vault's tomes Asmodeus or Azazel. Entities debated as fallen angels in Kabbalistic lore, or psychological archetypes born from collective guilt. Your pleas rising in a hoarse croak that bounces off the walls like accusations returned undelivered. The chamber's silence amplifying every whisper of despair into a roar inside your skull. Empathy for those medieval mystics who clawed at their cell's stones until nails bled, seeking divine voices that answered only with echoes of their own madness. The cold floor numbing your legs as fatigue creeps in like fog through unseen cracks. Your invocations fading to murmurs as the isolation deepens into a void, where time stretches like taffy pulled too thin. The gnawing doubt evolving into a feverish haze that blurs the line between prayer and curse, leaving you slumped in the dark as frenetic culminations await in sacred groves ahead, where rituals peak in sensory chaos that sears your essence with revelations and pandemonium. The chamber's door creaking open faintly to admit a draught hinting at ancient trees clawing at the sky slick with dread. You stand amid the ancient oaks that claw at the storm-tossed sky like skeletal fingers grasping for lost souls, their gnarled branches creaking under the weight of centuries-old moss that drips with the night's residual rain. The ground slick with dew and the slicker sheen of fear sweat from the gathered figures who circle the central bonfire in a frenzy that builds like a wave cresting to crash. Your heart pounding in sync with the rhythmic drums fashioned from hollowed logs, beaten with bones purportedly from martyred saints, exhumed during the relic wars of the 11th century, when Byzantine emperors traded holy fragments like currency to buy alliances against Seljuk invaders, debated by numismatic historians as sacred commerce or profane profiteering that desecrated tombs across Constantinople. Shocking in how fingerbones of apostles fetched prices higher than gold ducats, while pilgrims starved en route to touch them. Sad for the grave robbers who lost limbs to traps set in catacombs, where echoes amplified their screams like amplifiers in a modern concert gone silent mid-note. Empathy twisting in your gut as you join the circle, the ritual peaking in a whirlwind of chants that rise to a deafening roar. Voices blending Latin inversions with guttural tongues, borrowed from Celtic druids suppressed during Rome's conquests in the 1st century BCE, where Julius Caesar's legions burned sacred groves to break the spirit of Gaulish tribes, debated as military strategy or cultural genocide that erased oral law passed through generations like whispers fading in wind. Absurd tidbits of druids memorizing verses for 20 years, only to have their wicker men giant effigies stuffed with sacrifices torched by invaders, who mocked the flames as barbaric while hosting gladiatorial bloodbaths in arenas. Ironic, like criticizing a backyard BBQ for smoke, while firing up a gas grill that pollutes twice as much. The sarcasm flickering through your mind as the bonfire leaps higher, flames searing your face with heat that wars against the dew's chill, soaking your boots, the ground churning to mud under stamping feet that splash filth onto your calves. Sensory chaos overwhelming as herbs thrown into the fire release acrid smoke that stings your eyes to tears and fills your lungs with a coughing haze laced with hallucinogens from nightshade berries foraged under full moons. Mutating the metallic tang on your tongue from prior blood pricks to this fiery sharpness that burns like swallowing embers. Revelations erupting in your vision, flashes of society's true leaders, unmasked as inquisitorial plants sown during the Waldensian persecutions of the 12th century, where poor preachers wandering the Alps were hunted by Dominican hounds for daring to read Bibles in vernacular tongues. Shocking in how Pope Innocent III launched crusades against his own flock. Sad for the barefoot apostles burned at stakes while cardinals feasted in Roman palaces. The frenzy peaking as dancers whirl closer to the flames, robes catching sparks that singe fabric and skin alike. Pandemonium searing your essence with the raw truth of rituals born from desperation against tyrannical faiths. Empathy for the marginalized fueling the chaos as bodies collide in ecstatic release. The grove's trees groaning like witnesses to eternal cycles of faith and folly. Your senses ablaze until the peak shatters into exhaustion. The fire settling to coals as fading echoes lead through betrayed corridors where steps falter on blood-smeared tiles, confronting remnants of shattered illusions that cut deeper than any blade of regret in the ebbing night. Your faltering steps slip on the blood-smeared tiles of the betrayed corridors, the slick crimson underfoot warm and viscous like the life ebbing from a wound you can't staunch. Each hesitant advance sending echoes through the labyrinthine passages that twist like veins in a dying body. The air heavy with the coppery reek of spilled vitae that clings to your nostrils, mutating the metallic tang on your tongue from the grove's fiery herbs to this cloying sweetness of decay that coats your mouth like forbidden fruit turned rotten. The walls streaked with handprints where kin clawed in vain against the onslaught of revelations that shattered illusions like glass under a hammer's blow. Shocking in how medieval betrayals unfolded in the corridors of power during the Pazzi conspiracy of 1478 in Florence, where the Medici brothers were ambushed mid-mass in the Duomo by rivals armed with daggers hidden in sleeves, debated by Renaissance historians as a family feud over banking empires, or a papal plot to curb Florentine independence under Sixtus III. Absurd tidbits of assassins practicing on wax dummies, moulded from executed criminals' faces. Ironic, like rehearsing a boardroom coup only to slip on spilled coffee during the presentation. The sarcasm slithering as you navigate the smears left by those who fell to infighting, sparked by the vault's truths, names of infiltrators etched in the scrolls, planted by church spies during the Lollard suppressions in 15th century England, where Wycliffe's followers preached Bible access for all and were hunted by Archbishop Arundel's constables, who burned heretics at Smithfield stakes amid cheering crowds. Sad for the scholars whose tongues were cut out before flames consumed them. Empathy gripping your chest as you imagine their final gurgles mirroring your own choked sobs in this bloodied maze. The tiles cold beneath your palms as you steady yourself against a wall where frescoes peel like flayed skin, depicting Judas's kiss twisted into a society's self-inflicted wound. The pain of broken trust slicing deeper than any blade of regret forged in the forges of Venetian arsenals during the Ottoman wars of the 16th century, where galleys rowed by chained convicts clashed in Lepanto's bloody seas, debated as a Holy League victory or Pyrrhic slaughter that drained treasuries while admirals betrayed allies for glory. Shocking in how Cervantes lost a hand in the fray, yet wrote of quixotic quests for honour amid betrayal's sting. Your vision blurring from tears and fatigue as the corridors narrow, echoes fading into a hush that amplifies the throb of your wounds. Illusions shattered like the mirrors in Versailles Hall, where Louis XIV's courtiers whispered plots behind fans. Ironic like posting a group selfie only to crop out the backstabber later. The remnants confronting you in pools of congealed blood reflecting your fractured face. A mosaic of doubt and loss that cuts to the core, leaving you to emerge weary into dawn's pale light, where silent reflections await in the weak morning glow. Body throbbing with the quiet ache of survival and wisdom etched in scars that fade but never fully heal. You emerge into the weak morning glow filtering through the mist-shrouded ruins, your body weary from the night's endless torment, each muscle aching like overworked strings on a lute plucked too harshly in a forgotten minstrel's hall during the troubadour suppressions of the 13th century Albigensian crusade, where poetic souls wandered southern France singing of courtly love, only to be silenced by crusader swords that cleaved verses mid-stanza, debated by literary historians as a clash of romantic idealism against orthodox rigidity, or a veiled war on Occitan independence that drowned ballads in blood. Shocking in how bards' lutes were smashed against cathedral stones while their owners burned for heresy whispered in lyrics. Sad for the lovers who lost their serenades to the pyre's roar. Empathy softening the edges of your exhaustion as you lean against a weathered wall that crumbles slightly under your palm. Flakes of stone dusting your fingers like the ashes of illusions scattered in the wind. The pale light washing over your scars, throbbing reminders of pricks and pursuits that pulse with the quiet ache of survival. Each one a map of lessons etched in flesh during eras like the flagellant brotherhoods of the 1340s, where penitents whipped through plague-stricken streets seeking mercy from a silent god, debated as mass hysteria or genuine contrition amid bodies piled in carts. Absurd tidbits of their whips tipped with iron hooks that tore skin like parchment ripped from forbidden tomes. Ironic like joining a wellness retreat only to emerge more battered than before. The sarcasm fading into a hush as dawn's fingers brush the horizon, softening the oak's clawing branches into gentle silhouettes swaying in the breeze that now whispers rather than howls, carrying the faint scent of dew-kissed earth instead of damp rot. Your breath slowing to match the rhythm of a world awakening without the weight of midnight oaths. The metallic tang on your tongue dissolving into the fresh taste of morning mist that cools your parched throat. Empathy for the betrayed souls of history nights, witches, heretics who sought solace in shadows only to find sharper pains. Their stories woven into yours like threads in a tapestry, fraying at the edges but holding firm in memory's loom. The quiet ache easing as you ponder wisdom born from the frenzy that secrets bind as much as they break. Alliances crack under storms but reform in calmer lights, and survival's scars, though throbbing, fade into badges of resilience against injustice's blade. The pale glow strengthening gradually, torchlight motifs extinguishing in the sun's soft rise. Your body settling into a weary peace as the ruins blur into serenity. The wind-down whispering of halls emptying, chairs creaking silent, breaths deepening into sleep's embrace where history's echoes soften to dreams. The last scars throb, a gentle reminder that dawn always follows the darkest rites, fading now like a whisper carried away on the morning breeze. You emerge into the weak morning glow that filters through the mist-veiled ruins like a hesitant promise after a night of unrelenting shadows. Your body weary from the labyrinth of torments that twisted through secret oaths and betrayed whispers. Each step on the dew-kissed grass a soft cushion against souls still throbbing from jagged stones and pursuit's frantic scramble. The air crisp now with the scent of damp earth awakening under the sun's tentative touch, carrying no more the metallic tang of fear but a fresh, herbal whisper from wildflowers nodding in the breeze that rustles the ancient oaks into gentle sighs instead of clawing frenzy. Their branches swaying like tired arms lowering after a long vigil. The scars on your skin pricks from wax seals, scratches from brambles, bruises from cold floors pulsing with a quiet ache that fades like echoes in an emptying hall. Reminders of lessons carved deep in the soul during eras when societies born from desperation crumbled under their own weight, much like the flagellant processions that faded with the plague's retreat. Their whips set aside as survivors pondered the wisdom in self-inflicted pain versus the resilience found in simple dawn's renewal. Empathy lingering for those medieval seekers who chased enlightenment through darkness, only to find it in survival's subtle light. The ironic twists of history softening now into a tapestry where betrayals and revelations weave into patterns of human frailty. No longer searing but soothing like a balm applied to old wounds. Your breaths deepening as the glow strengthens, torchlight motifs extinguishing forever in the rising sun that bathed the ruins in gold. Halls emptying of hooded figures who dissolve like dreams at waking. Chairs creaking silent in abandoned chambers where feasts once bound and broke. The wind carrying away the last whispers of anguish into a sky clearing blue. Your body settling into the grass with a sigh. The ache easing to a gentle throb that lulls like a heartbeat slowing to rest. Wisdom etched not in pain, but in the quiet knowing that every midnight rite yields to morning's mercy. Fading now like a whisper on the breeze, the world hushed and healing as sleep claims you at last,